Hi guys, it's Dr. Spears with drpremed.com. I'm excited to have you today as we're going to discuss debunking medical school admissions statistics. And what we're going to focus on, what all pre-meds like to ask is, what are my chances? You guys want to know about your MCAT scores and GPA, what you need to be competitive for getting into medical school. So we're going to discuss that. I'm also going to tell you about the whole process of getting into medical school based from the AICOM perspective and just the numbers. So you have a good idea, you know what to expect when it comes to the process of getting into medical school, because we know it's extremely competitive. And so if a lot of you guys, this is probably you right now. This is you. You're tearing your hair out. You're just very worried. It's an anxious process, trying to figure out what can I do to become that applicant who actually successfully gets into medical school. I want you guys to know, you guys don't know what you don't know, because what I like to say about that is, for most of you, you never applied to medical school, so you don't know what to expect on this process of actually getting into medical school. And if you already applied to medical school, not to knock you or anything about that, but it didn't work out for you. So you guys really want to pay attention whether you're a first-time applicant or a re-applicant to medical school, because I have a lot to share with you, because I don't want you to have this kind of face expression or just types of these thoughts, feelings, and worries and concerns as a pre-med student going through the process of trying to get into medical school. So we want to make sure that's not you. And what I'd like students to know is that the hardest part of medical school is getting in. I was actually on one of my clinical rotations, I think maybe family medicine or something like that. I know it was like outpatient somewhere, doing that in New York. And that's what one of the physicians said. She's like, yeah, I understand that the hardest part of medical school is actually getting in. And she actually had a daughter who was in the process of applying to medical schools, or kind of asking the current medical students their perspective and take on things. And she was just aware that it's extremely difficult to get into medical school. And one thing I want you guys to know, like, I'm not just saying this when it comes to that, but did you know that over 60% of first time applicants to medical school are going to be rejected? Yes, 60%. So we can, that's not the actual number. I think it's really around 62, 63%. So we can do a little bit of math and round it up to 66. And so we know that that's 2/3. So you can look to your left and look to your right and just think about, out of three people, that's one person to your left and one person to your right, and you in the middle. Two of you guys aren't going to get into medical school. We want to make sure that you're the person that actually gets into medical school. So pay attention and just be aware of that. That's just how difficult the process is. Now, a lot of you guys are thinking, you know what? You really have one or two options when it comes to getting into medical school. You can go and follow the data, which I'm going to present to you. And we already told you that over 60% of applicants don't get into medical school, or you can try to figure it out on your own. And you just got to think, what are the pros and cons of doing that? I like to tell students, if Google worked, wouldn't everybody who wanted to be a doctor already get admitted by now? And we all know that's not the case. And when I say Google, I'm being liberal about that, because I'm referring to Student Doctor Network, Reddit, and people in their social period, all that stuff that you can find online. But you don't know where this information is coming from, fact or fiction. What I like to say about that, you really want to use the data, follow the data, and trust the data, because you guys remember, medicine, science, they go hand in hand. And we like to be evidence-based in our approach to what we're doing. So I have some more data, and we're really going to get into some numbers for you. But I really want to put that in your head, that medical school admissions is extremely competitive, and you guys just need to be aware of that, because we all know, oh, I know somebody who didn't have certain stats and they got into medical school. That's really the exception and not the rule. And you don't want to try to get into medical space on chance alone, when you think about all the time and effort you already put into this process of trying to be a doctor. So we don't want to do anything by chance. Okay, so it's an arms race. Well, I kind of doing that. Like, you guys, if you're historical history buff, anything like that, like the Soviet Union and United States and nuclear arms race, who can get more and more of the well, not weapons, but the things that they need to defend the country. That's what nuclear arms race. And we see that also happening with medical school admissions. And just one of the things that you need to be aware of is that there are more and more applicants applying to medical school each year, as you can see on this chart. So, and you guys might think, oh, this doesn't look like there's that much of a difference in it. But I'll just share some numbers with you guys so you just have an understanding of what's going on. So in 2017, you had 51,680 people applying to medical school. Then 2018, you had 52,777 applicants applying to medical school. So we have a slight increase there. And then 2019, we had 53,370 people applying to medical school. Then we had a pandemic hit in 2020, and we had a slight decrease in the number of applicants applying to medical school. We had 53,030 applicants applying to medical school. Now, in 2021, most recent data we have available, there were 62,443 applicants applying to medical school. So look at that jump. We see that on the chart. And what we need to put in perspective is that, yes, we have more people applying to medical school, but the number of seats available aren't increasing at that rate. So that just means that, remember I said 60% of people are going to be rejected from medical school? We can just look at those numbers and know that it's going to be a little bit more than that just because of how that works out for you. And so I want you guys to know that. Just remember, it's extremely competitive. It's an arms race. Every year it's going to get more and more competitive, not only with the number of people applying to medical school, but just the type of stats that you're going to need to be competitive for medical school. So just keep that in mind and know that's what it is. Again, here we go, talking about medical school admission statistics, and a rejection rate is brutal. Remember, kind of talked about this 63% rejection rate. So there we do. We can round it up to that 2/3 of people applying to medical school aren't going to get in. And so let's put this in number. How do we get to 63%? So out of the 62,443 people who applied to medical school, only 22,666 got in. So you guys can run the numbers on it and you can just see how competitive that is, where 2/3 of people applying to medical school just aren't going to get in. So extremely difficult. And that's when people ask, what are my chances? You're anxious, you're worried about things. That's what you need to keep in mind, where people tell you, oh, don't worry about it. It's not really that bad. Yes, look at that number. 63 are going to be rejected. So just one, and so let's just take a look at this, kind of put some things in perspective when we start digging into these numbers, and where you guys can kind of figure out where you're going to stand in this process of getting into medical school. And so we look at the numbers, and we're going to see that there were actually 1,099,486 individual applications submitted to medical schools. So that means out of those about 62,000 people that applied to medical school, that averaged to about 18 schools that each applicant applied to. That number is actually going up a bit, because in previous years it was about 17. And I have my thoughts on the process of whether it makes sense or not to increasing the number of schools that you apply to. I think you get to something called the law of diminishing returns, where you think, oh, I'll just add more and more medical schools that will boost my chances of getting in. No, that's not the case, because you'll find out, remember, only 22,000 people got into medical school. You're going to realize is that there's basically two groups of people apply to medical school. You get the applicants, and they're the ones that basically get into all the medical schools they apply to. They're just the ones that are wanted by the medical schools. They knew what they were doing to position themselves correctly with their personal statement. They had the stats, the numbers, their essays, their extracurricular activities, all the things that I teach and help students do in my pre-med coaching programs that I have available for applicants and pre-med students who want to get into school. I help them kind of figure out how to make themselves into the must-admit pre-med student who actually gets into medical school. So that's what I do. Those are the students I work with. They're pretty much know that they can have confidence that they're going to get into medical school one way or another when they work with me at drpremed.com for that. And so they won't have to go beyond 18 medical schools. And then we get into this other number, 7,094. So we have 1,999,486 applications. And then on average, each medical school, they're going to get 7,000 applications. And I crunched some numbers, and the average size of medical school class is actually only 146 students. So you look at that number, and there is no way that a medical school is going to possibly be able to get through 7,000 applications and get that down to 146 students. So they have to be ruthless in this process of deciding who's going to get into medical school. And one thing that's kind of going to shock you guys when you look at that number, that 7,000, we only have 146 on average in the class, is that ad comes in, they're actually looking for reasons to say no to your application. They're looking for reasons to reject you just so that they can get this number down. And so that's something you need to be aware of. They're not looking like, oh, let's take a chance on this applicant. Let's see what they bring to the table. None of that. They are just ruthless process because they have to get it down and they don't have the manpower to go through all of this stuff. And so that's just something that you guys need to be aware of in this process. And so, do you guys know the number one factor that goes in medical school admissions decision? There's so many things that you can possibly think about. That what could it be? Is it your GPA? Is it your letters of recommendation, your personal statement, your MCAT score, your extracurriculars, having a famous person write something on your behalf, getting published, where you went to undergrad, the pedigree of that university or institution that you went to? So just think about that. Think about what could it possibly be? What would be the number one factor that an AdCom is going to look at to decide who's actually going to get into medical school? So you had some time to think about that. And what it comes down to actually, when you're going to find out, is it's your MCAT score. Do not let anybody tell you otherwise. It is your MCAT score. You need to keep that at the forefront of everything that you do. Now, when I was an undergrad, I was a president of the Premed Society at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. And so I made contacts with a lot of AdComs throughout the country. So when I give you guys advice and information, it's like, oh, this worked personally for Dr. Spears. Absolutely not. This is because what I like to say, a sample size of one doesn't make for good science or medicine. So that's not what I like to do. So this is the general consensus across the board, wherever you go. That's what it's going to come down to, is your MCAT score. And so Dr. McDade, he was at the University of Chicago Price School of Medicine at the time, serving on the admissions committee, and really moved up in the medical ranks and everything like that. And he told our pre-med group that the MCAT is a test that you want to take once and only once. And you guys need to keep that in mind. And then I also went to grad school in Boston. And I met a professor there at the admissions committee at, what school was he at? He was at Tufts. And he said that you do not want to be a reapplicant for medical school when it comes to the MCAT, because a lot of students think, oh, I did poorly the first time I took the MCAT, and so I have this huge improvement in my score, and so AdComs are going to look favorably upon that. Yes, they may not. They most likely will, but this AdCom said we're scientists, and every time that you retake the MCAT, that's another breadcrumb, a piece of data that you left us. So if you have 3 attempts at the MCAT, let's say you got a 500 the first time around, then you got a 509 the next time around, and then you got a 514 on the MCAT. So 9 and 14, 23, and then do that. So let's say that, and failing on my math there, but we're not going to say that you're a 514 MCAT test taker because you have the 500, let's say, the 509, and the 514. We're going to peg you closer to the 509, probably around 508, actually, on what you're actually going to be as a student for the MCAT, just because you left us all that data and you're not. But it would be different if you took the MCAT once and you scored a 514. That's all we have. And so if that's the case, we're going to say that you're a 514 MCAT test taker because that's all the information we have for you. So I want you guys to keep that in mind with that the MCAT is the number one factor that goes in medical school admissions decision. And you got to think, remember, more people applying to medical school than seats available. And so we're going to kind of start screening applicants. And we need a fast, quick, and dirty way to do that because we're looking for reasons to say no. So you don't want to think that you can just get ahead and skirt the system. I know some people are like, oh, well, this medical school says that they take the most recent score. Another one says that they take your highest composite score. And another one says that they take your highest score in each section. Yeah, but they're also human as well, and they're going to kind of see that other data as well. So that might be the official policy, but it might not be what actually happens. Because I can tell you a story sitting in an admissions committee at a medical school, and they were debating between two applicants on who they were going to admit. One person had a lot of ties to the school, was very invested in wanting to attend that medical school, was in contact with people, let them know that they really, really wanted to go to that school. So maybe you know somebody in admissions committee, and so they can kind of move you ahead a little bit in that process. But again, it's a admissions committee. So it's a committee decision that needs to be made. And then you have somebody who's the head of the committee. And this is what the head of the committee said, the chairperson of the committee said about this process. Yeah, I don't care that this person has ties to our university and our institution. I don't care about that. We're going to go with the person that has the highest MCAT score. End of discussion. Moving on to the next set of things on the agenda for this meeting. And that's the end of it. So the person, they had their personal committee advocate advocating for them and everything like that. But at the end of the day, it came down to the MCAT test score. So you want to make sure that you are performing well on the MCAT because that is the number one decision. And so I have a course and program that actually helps students who are struggling with the MCAT because I know how important that is. I know we have all these commercial MCAT prep courses out there. My course that I have for students isn't about teaching you guys the science because those commercial prep courses can do that better for me. I want to teach you guys how to think like a doctor and how to actually make the most of your MCAT prep and your MCAT test day with test taking strategies, study skills that you can apply not only for the MCAT, but once you're in medical school so you can sell in your coursework and then for your board, your licensing exams, the same philosophy and concepts that I teach you for the MCAT can use throughout your medical career so that you don't have to worry about the MCAT being a roadblock that prevents you from moving on and getting into medical school. I have a program for students, applicants who are applying to medical school in particular for the MCAT. So let's kind of get into some numbers. I've been doing a lot of talking. And a caveat that I want you guys to know when it comes to all of this information that I'm sharing with you is that you have to remember that I only have the most recent data. And as we solve the trends with the number of people applying to medical school, and I said it's an arms race, that also applies with the numbers that you need to be competitive for getting into medical school, because this is a previous cycle data. So that means the numbers are actually increasing. So you don't want to rely on this, like, oh, I just want to get to this range and I'll be okay. No, because the people currently applying are going to be a little bit above the previous cycle. So you want to keep that in mind. And so this is the data collected on everybody who took the MCAT and applied to medical school. So we have our 4 sections of the MCAT, and so we can look at our chemical and physical foundations of biological sciences, biological systems, and the average that people had to apply to medical school was a 126.3 on that. And then we have our CARS section, CARS, critical analysis and reasoning skills. The average that students had on that who applied to medical school was 125.7. And then we have our biological and biochemical foundations of living systems. The average that we saw on that was a 126.7. And then another section we have was our psychological, social, and biological foundations of behavior. That was a 127.3. And so that means out of everybody applying to medical school, aka the applicants, their average or total MCAT score was a 505.9. So that's what you guys can think about. Everybody applied to medical school, 505.9. Okay, decent numbers. We can see how that works out. Here's the thing, guys. Those were applicants. This is matriculants. These are the people that not only applied to medical school, but they actually successfully got into medical school. Now we can take a look at these numbers. They're higher. We have a CPBS of 127.9, a CARS of 127, and then we have our biological, biochemical of living systems, that was a 128.2. And then our psychological, social, and biological foundations of behavior, that was a 128.8. So bringing our total MCAT for the people who not only just applied, but successfully got into medical school, they were at a 511.9. Guys, you see a difference here. We got a big difference going on. I'm going to talk about these differences just so you know what's going on here. So I actually went and I calculated the differences between the people who were accepted to medical school versus those applied. So we can put this in context for you. And so when you're studying, you're thinking what you need to do for the MCAT. Remember that total was a 511. And so keep that in mind. And so when we look at the score difference, the people who were not only matriculants versus those who applied, they actually, on a chemical and physical foundations, their score was 1.6 higher. So they scored 1.6 points higher. And then on their CARS, they scored 1.3 higher than the people who just applied. And now look at this when we look at the biological and biochemical foundations. Look at that number. That's 1.5 points higher. And then we also look at the psychological social section of the MCAT. They scored 1.5 points higher. And so look at that. Total MCAT score was 6 points higher. Now, if you guys didn't know, here's what, remember I told you about all that 7,000 applications that a medical school is going to receive? And then I also said that the number one factor that goes in a medical school admissions decision is your MCAT score. And so what schools can do is they can use a computer and they can put minimum thresholds and cutoff scores where if you don't get to a certain score threshold on the MCAT, the computer will automatically reject your application. So if you were banking on other parts of your application to give you a boost, you thought, oh, I have so much life experience that I was going to talk about in my personal statement or my meaningful activities, my publications, or extracurriculars that I did and all of that stuff, or somebody's going to write me a glowing letter recommendation. No one is going to see it if you don't have the MCAT score. Now, you're going to find out some people get in and they talk about, like, oh, I had such a low MCAT score and I got in. There could be extenuating circumstances. And what I like to say, that's something called survivor bias, where it's that one applicant who gets in and everybody wants to focus on them and like, oh, well, if they got in, maybe there's a chance for me. Again, this is a lot of chance. You don't want to go through medical school basing your strategy on chance. You guys worked too hard over the past several years to get where you are now to really put it down to chance. And so you need to take the time and be serious about your approach to the MCAT, because if you haven't taken it, you can really make a huge dent in what you're going to do, what caliber of applicant you're going to be for getting into medical school, because we know it comes down to your MCAT score. And I have my MCAT programming available to students that are struggling with the MCAT, because I've seen students that have done very well academically in their coursework, and then they struggle on the MCAT. And then I've seen the other way, where students have struggled in their coursework and a light bulb moment goes off and they figure out what they need to do for the MCAT. But I want to make sure, regardless of where you're at, that you don't struggle with the MCAT. That's why I have my course available to students to help them excel on the MCAT and basically get you guys some mastery for what you need to do for that. So we're talking about a lot of medical school admissions statistics and facts and figures and all of that. We know that there's the 63% rejection rate. I'm telling you guys, insider, how this process works for getting into medical school and laying that out for you. And this is just one component. So we have the MCAT. We know that's the number one factor. So what else are we going to be looking at? You guys are probably anxious and worried about this. And now we have some more data. Let's talk about GPA. And so a lot of variation here, because with the MCAT, that allows for an apples to apples, oranges to oranges comparison of applicants and their caliber, what they actually know for getting into medical school. Whereas GPA, that can vary because schools have very different grading policies and they just go about that process a lot differently. But we can kind of have some idea of what you need to expect. So if you're applying to medical school, as an applicant, the average GPA of the science is a 3.48. Okay. Not the best, not horrible. And the GPA of the non-science is about a 3.74. So that means the total GPA is about a 3.59 of everybody who applies to medical school. And a caveat about this is I will sometimes be contacted by students, applicants who know that the GPA is horrible, where it's above a 3, where it's below a 3.0. And if you're below a 3.0, that is a huge red flag, because even when you want to do a post-bac program to improve your GPA, they exist to help applicants who have done poorly. And I wrote a lot of materials on post-bac programs in ebook, even out there, that goes into some of the best post-bac programs and how to choose that for you. I have that available to students, applicants who are applying. One of the things that to run into wall with is when you consider the fact that you need to be above a 3.0. And a GPA is one of the hardest things to fix for you applying to medical school. There's so many calculators out there. You can put in your numbers and see what's going to happen with that, to see how much it would improve by how many courses you would take or whatever in regards to that. So that's just something to be aware of. You do not want your GPA to drop. So if you're struggling academically, slow down and reassess things. Don't feel that you need to be obligated to keep moving forward if your GPA isn't where it needs to be and you're just struggling academically. So these are the numbers that we have for everybody who's applying to medical school. So the applicants, we see these numbers, totals of 3.59. Now, here we go. Again, like the MCAT, there's a big difference between people applying to medical school and people who actually get into medical school, are matriculants to medical school. So we look at the data, look at them. GPA difference. The GPA for people who get into medical school, their science GPA is at 3.67. And then we also see that their non-science GPA, look at that, at 3.83. So that means their total GPA of people who apply to medical school is going to be a 3.74. 3.74. So let's take a look at, well, I have another comparison for you guys to make it easy for you so you guys can see how these numbers compare to one another. This might not look significant, but when you think at like a 4.0 scale, this is pretty significant. And so the science GPA people got in is up actually close 0.2. So look at that, like a 3.7 versus 3.5, big difference. Non-science GPA, really not that much. A 9/100th of a point. Overall total GPA difference is a 0.15. So we see that, not huge, but when you like empirically not huge, but when you actually put it in context of a 3.74 versus a 3.6, big difference there. So that's why you guys really want to make sure your GPA where it needs to be, where it needs to be. And again, people come from different schools, Harvard versus UCLA versus a more local school, Western Michigan. I'm just throwing out schools from the top of my head. So I really don't have anything to say about it versus UPenn, University of Indiana, Texas Tech, anything like that. Some of these schools have name recognition for medical schools, and so we want to just be aware of that. And even adcoms there, they become familiar with the type of applicants that come out of certain schools, so they can kind of put the GPA in context for you. But what I like to say is you want to strive to be the most competitive applicant possible for medical school and have the strongest credentials possible, where you're not focusing on chance or that somebody's going to just give you a pass, because medical school admissions, they don't give passes for people to get into medical school. So don't believe what you hear, those internet rumors, those people that like to post anonymously about what worked for them and how they got in. You do not want to have it. You want to have evidence, science-based, proven process for getting into medical school. And that's what I help students with. I have my 7-step MAPS formula process that works, where I help applicants go over the 7 things that I feel, not just feel, but know that if an applicant masters these 7 steps, they are going to be successful in getting into medical school. I've done it for students since 2008. I've been helping students successfully get into medical school, and I can help do the same for you and my programs and coaching I have available to you guys, so you're not relying on chance, because we see these numbers and we see these differences here in this process of getting into medical school. So again, extremely competitive. The hardest part of medical school is actually getting in. And again, what I said, that 60% of first-time applicants to medical school are going to be rejected. And you guys think you hear people being harsh, and you guys might think we're being mean, hard noses about it. No, because we don't want you to go through this process of being rejected, because it's a horrible experience. And with that, we don't want that to happen, where 2/3 of applicants aren't going to get admitted. And then we also see the difference between accepted and rejected applicants based on MCAT score is a 6-point differential there. So you want to be aware of that. And then even the difference between accepted and rejected applicants based on MCAT score, with people who get into medical school, they have a total GPA of a 3.74. And those who do not get in, their GPA is really about a 3.59. So you want to keep that in context. Remember, I'm telling you guys these numbers. This is the latest data. So that means when you guys, by the time you're applying, you want to be above this data point when it comes to these numbers. And then we also see that over 1 million applications were submitted to medical schools. And we're going to use, AdComs are going to use a computer that we're going to put in our threshold numbers for the MCAT and GPA. And if you don't meet it, we're going to kick you out the door, toss it, rejection pile, and no human's ever even going to take a look at your application. That's why I want you to focus on your numbers and make your numbers a priority, because if you don't have the stats, nothing else that you do as a pre-med even matters, because no one's going to see it. And you guys just need to be aware of that. And so again, did some crunching on these numbers, and we found out that on average, a medical school is going to receive 7,000. Okay, we had a little bit of okay, there must be a typo here because 7,000, about 953 applications or so. That's not 70,000. It's about 7,000. So I have a typo there. So I need to correct that for you guys. But 7,000 applications when an average class size is only 146 students. And so we can run the numbers on that. We got to get from 7,000 to 146. And so if an AdCom, remember, we're looking for reasons to say no. And again, to put this in context for an AdCom, we look at your application. We're going to give it the due diligence that it deserves if you get past that computer screen. And here's the thing. If we say yes to you, that means for out of every 100 people who apply, I'm going to choose one. So that means the person that I pick, you need to be better than 99 other applicants applying to medical school because of just how the numbers work out. And so keep that in the back of your mind as a pre-med student and constantly ask yourself, are you better than 99 other pre-med students out there? Because out of 100, only one's going to get in, that they're going to choose to get down to that 146 in that incoming class, and knowing that 2/3 of people that apply to medical school are going to be rejected. And so you have to ask yourself specifically, you got somebody over here, you got somebody over here, and then you're in the middle. Are you better than these other two? And then globally speaking, when AdCom looks at your application, are you better than 99 other pre-meds? So just keep that in mind. And again, this process of right now, applicants, they're applying to on average 18 medical schools. You don't need to go above that, and you need to be strategic and take a targeted approach to applying to medical schools. In my programs and coaching, I teach students what to look for and how to position themselves for applying to medical school and actually helping them choose which medical schools would be a good fit for them based on their background, where they want to go, and all these other factors. That's one thing I coach students on, because you're not going to really improve your chance. Again, law of diminishing returns with that. And students think, oh, I'll just add more and more schools. No, we already know what caliber of applicant you are, and that's pretty global, consistent across the board. And where one med school is not going to, oh yeah, we're going to take Johnny in at our school, even though just not competitive everywhere else, not going to work that way. And then you have Susie competitive everywhere, she's going to get in. So she wouldn't even need to go up to 18 medical schools, only if she wants to. But then if you work with me, you're a student like me, you work with me, you're one of my students, you probably start getting your acceptances, your interview invites, and you get to a point where you're like, you know what? I got into a couple schools. I'm feeling good about this process. I'm not even going to take on some of these interviews. I'm going to save that for another applicant who really wants to get into medical school. And if you've never been in that position, it's uncommon, but it does happen. I know a lot of people, you guys are just hoping on that one medical school to say yes to you, because all it does is take one. I want to make sure that happens for you with Dr. Premed and all my coaching programs and everything I have for you. So I just want to guys share some of this stuff so you guys just know how competitive this process is. And so look, you're over here on the left. Remember, I said you don't know what you don't know. And so you want to get over to the other side, the right, where you belong, and you want to be accepted in medical school, but there's a cliff and this huge canyon or whatever to drop off. And how are you going to get to the other side? What do you think it takes to get over to the other side? I am Dr. Spears with drpremed.com. And what I can do for you is I can give you a bridge that's going to help you not effortlessly, but make the process strategic, streamlined, and give you a clear-cut process for what you should be doing and when you should be doing things to successfully get your medical school acceptance so that you actually become a doctor. Because there are so many rumors out there about what it takes to get into medical school, and people are being led in the wrong direction, where you have people who aren't even really qualified to give advice on how to get into medical school, and they just believe like, oh, I successfully got into medical school so I can show other people how to get into medical school. That's not the case, unfortunately, because there's so many factors that go into this process, and even medical school admissions is changing. What worked in the past doesn't work anymore, and I have some strategic strategies in place that work, where one thing is, a lot of pre-meds feel burnt out, where they just feel there is not enough time in a day to do all their extracurricular activities. And they just feel like, oh, I got to get all these hours accumulated in all these diverse areas. And they're doing all of this work and it's not paying off. And I want to cut back on what you're doing as a pre-med and have you focus on the things that matter so that you can be successful. And so I can give you this bridge so that you can get across to the other side, to actually get into medical school and do what you want to do with your life and be happy, have proud parents, and know that you're going to be set for life because you're going to be a doctor. Nobody can take that away from you. Proud parents, all of that good stuff can happen for you if you follow the process, the roadmap that I have for you, where you're not going on this journey alone in this process of getting into medical school. And that's what I do at drpremed.com since 2014. So you don't have to worry about it. And again, this is something that you guys need to remember, that the hardest part of medical school is actually getting in. Once you're in, and things have changed. I could have said that. People were like, Dr. Spears, that's not the case. You remember how we had to study for our boards and they were actually scored, where now boards are now pass and fail. It's a big difference there. So look at that. You guys don't have to have scored boards. You just need to pass them for step one as of right now. Maybe in step two scored, but that's a little different beast and way down the road. But for getting into medical school, I'm going to guide you step by step to your medical school acceptance so that you actually become a doctor. Again, I say there's 7 steps that you must master in order to be successful in getting into medical school, so that you can earn your white coat. Look at that white coat ceremony, fitting in that white coat, getting that stethoscope, parents, family clapping, so proud of you. The parents happy that they raised a doctor. 4 short years, you're going to be a doctor. And parents, even your dad who doesn't show any emotion, is going to be so excited that, yeah, my son or daughter's in medical school. They're going to be a doctor. We're so proud and happy for them. All of this is possible with drpremed.com, and I can help you do things that you need to do to be successful in getting into medical school. So I wanted to share this with you and go over some stats, figures, just so you guys can have some actual data points to look at and review and know what it takes to be successful in getting into medical school. So I hope I did a nice job of covering that for you, and you guys can actually see what it takes so that you're not wondering, what are my chances? What do I really need to do? And now you actually see with this, we really focus really on the numbers. So you can see the GPA that you need, and most importantly, the MCAT, because the MCAT, again, number one factor goes into medical school. So I'm not going to say anything else. This is Dr. Spears with drpremed.com. You guys can find me, reach out to me if you have questions or any concerns. But I just want to share this information with you guys so you're on the right track of doing the things that you can do so that you actually get into medical school and become a physician.